Chapter 60. The young woman in the mirror refused to smile back at her. Ruslana kept trying, but her lips just wouldn't hinge rightly, and though she knew that smiling shouldn't feel mechanical, that's precisely what it felt like one of the arcade cabinets they had, and that she just couldn't manage no matter how hard she tried.
Anyone who's listening, anyone at all, please, just let me not screw this up. I'll do whatever it takes, I promise.
It came out as a plea and a growl, and she was worried that Lorelei might appear at the edges of her vision, intentionally or unintentionally listening in. But her room was quiet except for the scratchy sound of the weather outside, whatever that was supposed to be called. And all the old pantheon would not answer her, nor would her mind. Right. Ruslana took a long look around the room, and as for the first time, she realized how small it was. There was no real furniture. Why? She had been living here 3 years, and outside of the few concessions she had made to her own morale, it was as much a bunker as any other. She could recall conversations with Lorelei and Paul and Grendolf. Grendolf had left. Her fists clenched. She had known it would happen. Of course, it had been foolish, just like everything else she had messed up, to assume that the Lich was her friend. They had both had objectives, and they had both failed. He would go somewhere else, to wait this out. Perhaps they'd live, perhaps not. But he would abide and fester and roll the dice again. The memories weren't all bad though. When resting, she had had ideas, little ones. They had come from a long way off, but started with a simple sentence. Maybe, in the future, you won't have to worry about everyone else, all the time. If we get through this, then maybe you can do some things for yourself. Just for fun, with no other reason. When we get through this. Her eyes met her eyes, and did not look away.
Right.
Ruslana whispered, and suddenly not even the prospect of failure frightened her anymore. Lorelei had placed a bowl with flowers against the floor. Well, they had been flowers until Zemby snuck in and replaced them with something that was supposed to do the job a little quicker. What the job was, Ruslana wasn't sure, and she also was unsure how she felt about the endless sly winking Zemby had given her, but the dried potpourri smelled pleasant enough, ashen and cinnamon and floral. Walking was still a little difficult, and nobody knew she was walking, so there was nobody there to help. But that was better, because she wasn't going to allow herself the luxury of aid just yet. One foot went in front of the other, like so, just so. Various lights had been hung in the rec room, which had been hastily repurposed into a battle room while she had been under. It wasn't exactly a good plotting center like she had had back home, but the table had been cleared off except for some really strange-looking but kind of tastefully accented fudge. 2 figures towered over the table, one was a ceramic dragon with hastily splat-on golden paint, and the other a pewter miniature from some board gamer or another. Not that they were anything but dangers, but this felt a little disrespectful to such ancient foes. Bits of cardstock had been cut into roughly circular shapes and given faces. She could see her own, and it felt a bit surreal, but not exactly unpleasant. As for the grid itself, it had been painted over with terrain for as far as they knew it to be so, though Ruslana couldn't help but wonder how much of their knowledge was true with what Lorelei had been telling her. That wasn't important right now, however. She slammed her hands against the table and was surprised by how distant and muted the sound felt, like she was still in a dream. But her hands hit the solid wood, and regardless of how weak she still felt, she was heard. Paul had been frowning quietly to himself, reading half of a book that looked like it had been liberated by Grendolf, before Grendolf had left. Zhao was pacing back and forth, looking as if he were trying to recite a speech to no one in particular. Bones, the old skeleton, was doing something in the corner and it took her some time to realize he was very slowly prying sheet metal down where climatic oddity had torn it asunder. He wasn't quite as fast or skilled as Binky, who was laboring, semi-tirelessly by his side, but, from the looks of it, he hadn't stopped once. Zambi was on one of the lighting chandeliers they had installed above, leaning over it and looking down with a glum expression, hands swaying in the air as if reaching for something she couldn't quite grasp. It looked incredibly dangerous, but also a little fun, if leaning over precipices struck your fancy. The Boulder folk were gone, or in the foundry, Lorelei was gone. Of course. And she had truly wanted to say something to Lorelei, but, so it went, of course.
Hem.
Their attention came slowly, and she was startled by how happy people were. Had everyone been like this, in the yards? No, more than that. She had let them all down, and clearly she wasn't alone in feeling the dread in the air. But, just the fact that she was walking seemed to have made the room a little bit more pleasant. And Ruslana decided she would not let that energy go to waste. Once more, her fist struck the table. The tiny Lazarus figurine tipped over, and she subconsciously reached over to flip it right side up.
Everyone. I'd like to apologize for the lack of security I could provide. It was foolish of me to assume that the rest of these days would be spent in peace, but it was more than that to let my pride assume that I could be the hero that you all needed.
Her eyes stared up at the ceiling, yet Ruslana finally felt like smiling, even if it was a little mechanical, and a little forced. Sometimes that was fine, too. And right now.
Zhao. I am sorry that I was crass, and on edge. Ruslana, please, there's really no need, we're all just glad to see you again, and anyway, I mean, I was kind of.
Had he been practicing what to say to her? To apologize to her? Not only was she flabbergasted, but it was ridiculous. The young man had done nothing wrong. Dominus. Keeping friends in line was even worse than feelings. You knew what to expect them from, and it didn't do anything.
Zhao, you didn't do anything. I was terrified about Lorelei, I've been terrified about all of you, but especially her. I haven't wanted to fail anyone.
Ruslana didn't even try to hide it. There was no shame in tears, right now, and even if there had been, she felt oddly free.
I have failed before, you see, and I thought I was going to fail all of you. But I'm not, I won't, and we won't. So, status report. What the hell has been going on while I've slept? And, is it possible I could have some of that?
Sugar beets and cavern-grown fungus, with the addition of sweet squash, turned out to be a bold and flavorful combination, but absolutely divine. There was a rich and creamy texture to the fudge that warmed the soul, or perhaps it was the looks of relief she saw, as unwarranted as they were absolutely welcome.
Well, there's been a lot to discuss. You might not believe it until you see it yourself, but some weather satellites or something got knocked out of orbit. Or possibly a solar flare hit, but the result is the same. Things are looking pretty glum.
Paul adjusted his glasses and took a seat, moving one of the figures around without any real rhyme or reason. Bones shuffled over and gently, but firmly, moved them back to their earlier positions as the group assembled. She couldn't help herself, Ruslana smiled for the second time. They were quite a fine group of soldiers, though she had hoped for the fortune of them not having to be.
A solar flare, or possibly some satellites. So I see. Unpleasant to think that the environment is more against us than it has been. Can we just sit on things here, and wait for the worst of it to leave us be?
Zambi flounced down from the chandelier, landing with surprising elegance on the, thankfully empty, fudge tray. Indeed, the fall should have stunned her, and given that she had landed rump first, it did look a little painful, but perhaps plant folk were just made of the same stern stock as boulder folk? That would have to be a question for a more peaceful time.
I love that idea, Amazon bro, but Lorelei isn't 100% about doing the whoosh whoosh portal opening magic pathway thing. We've got lots of food back home, but in addition to
Zhao sort of bobbed his head towards Paul, who was cleaning his glasses absent-mindedly.
Weather satellites and solar flares, the roads are dangerous because of the dragon supertanks piloted by mysterious guys from beyond the stars. And, there's probably a warlord or two roaming the area looking for fights. Probably. Beyond the stars. You kids and your embellishment. Just because a few crazies have super weapons doesn't mean they're from an off-planet base or anything like that.
The room went dead silent.
Excuse me.
Bones ventured, somewhat meekly.
What on earth do you mean by off-planet base?
Paul, who had by this point cleaned his glasses to a perfectly glassy sheen, had returned with several unrecognizable branded beverages, warm from lack of good refrigeration. They had built several refrigeration units of course, but everything was working unreliably, and...
Oh ho! You didn't know, did ya? Well, I'm not supposed to talk about this sort of thing, but there's been moon bases for a while. One to study tidal effects, the other something about falling temperatures and rising precipitation. And there was another one farther out, to monitor toxins in the air, but we hadn't heard back from them for a while.
His hair flounced from side to side as he scratched at his chin. Paul's expression clouded, trying to remember something that wasn't quite sitting right in his mind.
You know, that weird lady. The one? Was her name. She was telling me about it. At first I thought she was pulling my leg, but the more I think about it, the more it sounds right. Surprised you military types didn't hear about it. I mean, maybe it was something corporate was doing in secret, but... Regardless of how terrifying and interesting that is, it doesn't seem to help us immediately. I'll need full disclosure later. For now though, facts. How much time do you think it would take you to get enough food here to keep us for the season, all things remaining constant?
This was directed at Bones, who she had decided was the best of the three at mental math. Zambi seemed incredibly intelligent but unfocused, and Zhao had a good sense of emotional intelligence, but...
A good question. If Binky would kindly help us, and we had some kind of security, I imagine we could do it in 2 or 3 trips, less with everyone helping to carry things or the aid of Lorelei.
Zhao winced and slapped his face. It left quite the red mark. Was he truly that angry with himself? Zambi murmured something to him, and looked even more sheepish. Ruslana could just hear him promise that he'd be more careful.
I can't believe I didn't think of bringing the blasphemous horn. I mean, I've wanted to play it since we got it, and a legion of demons would be perfect for bringing supplies over. And then we could have an infernal party while we're waiting, crud. That does sound like a missed opportunity, but if we get you there it's still a possibility. It might be more prudent to keep the horn as our trumpet card, however.
Ruslana coughed, but it was the kind of pun that only that foul Dark Lord would have laughed at. More was the pity.
Right, well. I think we can get you there, and even if we can't, we will make it through this. Compared to the yards, this is just a bit of a rough patch, right?
At least Zhao snickered and Paul shook his head. The rest of them didn't understand entirely, but... Ruslana ran her fingers through her hair. It was a bit longer, and she'd have to trim it again when she felt more steady on her feet, but that was fine for right now. It growing was a sign she was awake and alive, after all.
Take some time to yourselves, relax, and do not let worry be with you. No matter what happens from here on out, I shall be your strength, and we shall get through this. Together.
She wanted to say more, the words hung on her lips, but felt brittle and dangerous, so she swallowed them back. Besides, no matter what might come, she had made an oath, and oaths were precious things indeed.
Dismissed.
As if a spell had been shattered, the room burst into a frenzy of activity. Admittedly, most of it was just busy work, but sometimes that was the heart and the soul of new ideas. Not every moment can be filled with inspiration from nothing, just as discipline alone cannot overcome all odds. In the faces of her friends, she saw hope, and with that hope, Ruslana knew she could find the strength to get back up, no matter how many times she fell, no matter how many times she failed, and she would not fail, not here, not again. Turning to ask Paul more about these alleged off-planet bases she had heard absolutely nothing about, Ruslana was surprised to see a terrifying rip in reality, spitting forth stardust and soundless noises in between them. Paul, of course, seemed nonplussed and looked slightly askance beyond it, but that was Paul. Lorelei emerged from the void none the worse for wear. Her hair was unwashed and mussed and her braid a little loose, but she looked incredibly pleased, and it took Ruslana a moment to realize the reason why. Her broad smile only widened as Ruslana smiled back, slowly at first, before it tumbled forth unbeckoned. Paul surreptitiously maneuvered around the table, and began to play with the miniatures while no one cared to watch over them.
I suppose I should have waited to get up, but I had wasted too much time sleeping. I liked the flowers.
Ruslana coughed.
Those were all Zambi's ideas. I still don't know all the flowers that grow here, and it's not like we'll have time to learn about them, aha. But I'm glad you like them. Are you feeling better? Yes. I think I am. Enough. To do whatever it takes, I mean.
Lorelei wheeled over and lay her fingers against the table. They had several small cuts, as if she had been arm wrestling with very tiny fine wire, and lost. Ruslana wanted to ask about them, but Lorelei caught her off guard with a barrage of questions before she had the chance.
Have you heard about it all? Have you eaten? Do you need to sleep more? I guarantee it's okay to sleep for a bit if you're still feeling groggy. I promise I won't leave to go look into things if you do. No, fudge, which was quite good, probably not, no. I don't want to sleep, I want to know what happened to you.
Ruslana didn't realize how loud her voice had sounded until she spoke, but was thankful she had avoided shouting, at least. Her hands felt cold and tiny, and perhaps she did need to sleep a little bit more, but she had conceded defeat to the Tomb of Night later, for now.
I mean it. Lorelei, for a minute, I thought all sorts of stupid things. That maybe Zhao and Bones and Zambi had kidnapped you, for nebulous purposes.
She could faintly hear Zambi snickering like a hyena not too far away. Seriously, she wouldn't stop laughing, and now Zhao was laughing,
Regardless of how foolish that might sound and how rare the gift of privacy is here, I've got only myself to blame. For both that structural flaw, and, I was concerned. And the reasons are my own, and relate to my own failings, but, what I'm trying to ask is if you're alright.
And it was a stupid question. Ruslana didn't believe in them, at least not usually. But Lorelei had that gentle, soft smile that made you realize that things were going to be alright, or if they weren't, at least you had someone nearby that you could trust.
Thank you.
And those two words, and the little silence that preceded them, made everything seem brighter.
I was alright, I think. I still don't know where, exactly. But it wasn't dangerous, I don't think. And I was with Leopold, so it was alright.
Then, Lorelei continued to speak, and it all seemed to teeter dangerously.
Leopold. You do realize that man is? Yes. I do, absolutely. But trust me when I say, he wasn't dangerous, not there. He was just old, and alone. Anyway, I feel like even if we had both died there, we wouldn't actually have died. It was odd, Lana. Like a waking dream that won't leave you, a cold one. But I think, it might have been.
Then, Lorelei snapped her fingers, chuckling.
Right, I was so busy filling you in, I forgot. I'd actually went and tried to get some supplies, so that we wouldn't be worried about food or power or blankets or important stuff. Somehow I ended up on the island instead of where I was trying to go, but I met some sea folk retreating into the deep water. They had gotten stuck in some sharp wire and debris, and I helped them out.
Lorelei trailed off, pressing her just scarred fingers together.
Dragunov was just coasting on the waves. At first I thought maybe he had, you know.
The room had once again returned to a weird state of silence. Could the legendary dragon even die? It was a weird thing to think about, and somehow uncomfortable. As dangerous as the two dragons had become, admittedly, mostly to each other, the idea of one dying was unpleasant. Somehow, it felt as if the world itself were threatening to pull apart before they left, and that itself felt oddly like a warning to her. That two of the most powerful forces on the island, and perhaps the most powerful forces on the island, could be wounded so terribly.
I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't respond. He eventually flew off, but I think he's hurting bad now. I know it's not much to go on, but...
Lorelei pulled the brim of her hat over her face, so that Ruslana could only see the curls of her lips as she spoke. And Lorelei spoke cautiously, almost sounding as if she wasn't certain of herself.
What if, maybe, the two dragons waking up wasn't necessarily a bad thing? And what if we could help them?
Somehow. Nobody chose to confront her, and perhaps it was because they had all been thinking it in their own way. Paul had sniffed at the word dragon, of course, but that was Paul. Maybe their feud could be mended. Or perhaps their feud could not be mended, but perhaps their hearts could be. Ruslana didn't believe it herself, not fully. Vengeance was something that burned bright and strong and white-hot, and didn't give up just because people asked, even pleaded. It could turn a caring heart into a cruel one, a brigand into a killer, and blindside even heroes. It did not stop, and yet...
Maybe. Perhaps. I still want to hear everything that happened to you though, Lorelei. I wouldn't hold out too much hope that we can reach either Dragunov or Lazarus. Let alone both of them. They are trapped with each other. For now.
Ruslana paused, then shook her head.
But I won't put the idea out of mind. Once we don't have to worry about food or supplies.
Lorelei smiled, just a little. Just softly, just so. And Ruslana coughed again.
Well, anyway. I'm glad to be back with you, and that you're back with us. So
It was at that moment that the hatch above let out a creaky protest as something tried to open it. At first once, causing the room to fall into a dead silence, then the trapdoor hatch clattered down with a mad crash, iron clanging loudly against iron. Binky looked up from the wall he was reinforcing and motioned to Ruslana. The Cyclops could probably hold it shut against any and all comers save the dragons themselves. But would the dragons really stop to try to open a hatch that barely fit Binky? The mental image was unexpectedly cute, but also ridiculous. Ruslana shook her head. Let them come, whomever it was, they'd find it a hard challenge if they were an enemy. And if they were a friend. On the third try, the hatch finally held, and a huge red form fell down, squawking all the while, and desperately trying to use wings that were not hands to grab onto the bunker ladder. The Harpy's rider, looking none the better for wear, finally managed to grab a rung and her wing as well, stopping the poor creature from smashing into the floor. The purple demon hung to the ladder for some time before Crimsolino righted herself, murmured a very quiet thanks, and fluttered to the floor as elegantly as a bracken, twig, leaf, and detritus-covered harpy could manage.
Greetings. I would say I have come on behalf of the most munificent and yet humble Leopold, but sweet Leopold has wisely chosen to remain at arm's length. I come entirely on behalf of myself and my dear companion, Mr. Mammon, to negotiate with you in kind.
Mr. Mammon, who looked a little relieved, dropped to the ground next to her.
The boss is hemming and hawing about this. He wants to come and offer unconditional surrender, but also feels like he isn't worth it. So, while he rested, I suggested some parliamentary democracy. Crim wasn't the biggest fan until I explained we had 2/4 of the vote, hee. We'll be your hostages, basically, if you'll give Leo a chance.
It was at that moment that something rolled out from underfoot, where it had smashed into the chamber floor. Shining brilliantly in a cavalcade of color, the little boulder was greeted by scores of its kin, moving across the floor in a great horde of rocky and spherical lights. Well,
I have no quarrel with either of you. I do with your Leopold. Sweet or munificent or whatever else he may have told you to say.
Lorelei looked as if she wanted to say something, but Ruslana couldn't listen, not right now. And besides,
haven't the stomach for hostages, myself. Not here. If, however, you were to offer a true and unconditional peace, don't really have the stomach for further conflict, either. Times have grown ill and strange. In fact,
an idea came into her head, fully formed. She saw the boulders staring at her without eyes, their light shining a strained blue. And Ruslana had no idea what it meant, but felt she understood the feeling perfectly well.
I cannot trust myself in the sight of your Leopold, but I think I have an idea of what he could do to make himself welcome in district.
Chapter end.